everyone,
Righteous.
I am here with, they always warn you not to meet your heroes, but when it comes down to it, I always like to meet the people that influence my life in great kind of ways. So one of my favorite writers in the halls of Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan. Yes, you are an august company, as the case may be.
Yeah, geez, wow.
I was just explaining this the other night to somebody. I go, listen, you got to talk to this guy, Christopher Ruocchio, or read his stuff, because pretty much this is the science fiction, fan/fantasy, whatever category you want to lump it into. This is the books that I go to right now. These are, I read a lot of Steven Erikson. Try to make through the Malazan Empire series. Like,
Yeah.
try to make it through at least once, and then go back and reread each one about 5 times, so you might actually get the world building at some point. You know what I mean?
I've tried.
Yeah. Oh, it's the tomes. I forget who referred it to me. I think a customer at one point said, "You got to read these." But anyway, Christopher Ruocchio, it is incredible to have you here. The series that you are writing, not a trilogy. We will, I'm sure, discuss that at length. No angry emails at me, please. It is a series, which I've read so far, everything. Writer of the Sun Eater series, and just fantastic all-around guy. I enjoy you on Twitter. I enjoy reading your book. So thank you for deigning to come on to the show today.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's awesome. So I start this out with everybody, the academic brain of mine, and we'll talk about writing processes later, because that's part of the academic brain that I have to have now. Tell me about what community means to you, right? We'll start there.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, do a real sort of dictionary style definition. A community to me is a group of people, maybe related, maybe not related, genetically, but a group of people that shares a common ethos or pathos, logos, or ethnos, right? I'm a classics guy, so pardon my Greek. And maybe all 4 of those, maybe 2 or 3. So they might be bound together by a common philosophy or a common tradition, common emotional experiences, or morality, that sort of thing. Or they might be bound together genetically, be they a family unit or a kin group, something like that, and maybe all of the above. So some subset there.
I like dictionary definitions, sociological definitions, you name it. I mean, I'm certainly reading a lot about them. Now, you're in an interesting community. Now, again, I mentioned a few authors, but, writers in general, and if we just extrapolate and go through this, you all take the brunt of a lot of people's ire. You're not. So, tell me about your experience as a writer. I mean, let's even back up further. What got you into writing to begin with?
Well, I don't even really remember where it started that clearly, because I've been writing in some form since maybe kindergarten or first grade. I remember playing a lot of make-believe with my friends at recess, right? They were playing Dragon Ball Z. I was not allowed to watch it. So I asked them if I could be Batman. And they thought about it, as kids do, deliberately for several weeks, and then concluded in council that, yes, I could be Batman. And so while they grew up and developed social skills, I stayed inside at recess and kept writing down, because I would write down what we'd done that week, because we had one friend who was always the villain, and we defeated David pretty regularly on Fridays. And that he would come back as, the next villain on Monday. It was very systematized for a kid's game, which was saying something. But I would keep writing these things down. And eventually, while I started out as Batman, I began to extrapolate the character I was playing as I was allowed to watch Star Wars. And I think Star Wars probably had something to do with where all of this came from really early on, because I think I'm the last kid in America, pretty much, who got to watch Star Wars before the prequels. Had the VHS. I had the laser discs, actually, or my dad did. And so
I saw them on beta, so I'm pretty old myself, but I saw them on beta. That dates me quite dramatically too.
Yeah, well, the thing about that was I got to watch the original unedited versions, right? And so while I actually have very little animus towards the prequels, I got to be like the last original Star Wars fan. And I think that had something to do with it too, along with this make-believe and writing all these stories down. And it just it grew from there. When I was in middle school, I finished my first book. I never published it. I have one manuscript somewhere. It's terrible. But I finished it. And so I threw that one in a box, and I just kept rewriting the same story, and I would change, like with the ship of Theseus, right? I would change pieces and pieces until, is it the same boat anymore? I don't really know. And that eventually became Empire of Silence, which is, whoops, always do that backwards. That one there, with the
Yeah.
first in the series, and I've been doing that ever since. So it sort of grew up with me.
So it's a true labor of love then. I mean, this is iterative design more than anything else.
Yeah, it's part labor of love and part labor of not liking math class. Because this was, if you looked at my math notebook, it was, the equations on like one side and then just like random world building notes.
Yeah, for sure.
I no longer have any of those notes, so if I forget something, game over.
Well, I think you've done a really good job working the cycle so far. I mean, some of your influences, I think I picked up on this a little bit through there. You had mentioned your love of classics, right?
Oh yeah.
They kind of, and there seems to be this Roman, if you will, or Palatine style, a governance, kind of architecting the world, as world building, as we always talk about in literature, right? So, what are some of those influences that you've drawn from to get to the Empire of Silence, and with your latest Demon in White?
Well, putting Batman and Star Wars, aside, because we've talked about those already. History is, of course, a big one. As you say, there's a big Roman influence on the nature of the world building in the Sun Eater series. When I started it, I thought it was more late Roman Byzantine than it was Roman proper. But then the cover came out with the very sort of first century. It's kind of a weird mixture of different Roman elements there, but Western Roman art style, and everyone sort of was like, "Oh, it's space Rome." I'm like, I thought it was space Byzantium, but okay, I'll go with it. So there's a huge amount of classical historical world building, because this is a humanity in the distant future that in its distant past, somewhere between now and their time, survived being nearly wiped out by their own machines, and in surviving that, they decided to, one, never build AI again, and two, to create a civilization that was very human, right? So they went back to a lot of the foundational cultures and myths of ancient humanity, and sort of build these things together. So the Solid Empire in the Sun Eater books is part Rome, it's part part Byzantine Empire as well. But there's some Mauryan influence in India. There's some Qing influence as well, particularly as regards the sort of Qing systematized corporate punishment
Hmm.
in their legal codes. The Chantry judiciary is very much a Qing magisterial court. You are going to get this many lashes and these parts cut off because you have done these things. Although the Byzantines did that sort of stuff too. I'm doing a lot of reading about Central Asian empires now, because I realized I had a big Central Asian hole in my education. So I got a lot of stuff there, but the sort of canon, which is, I know, a dirty word, of Western literature and of science fiction too, is a big influence. I'm a huge Tolkien fan.
Hmm.
Frank Herbert was a huge influence on me, although mostly I argue with him. I think I borrow some world building from Dune, but then I sort of punch back at a lot of his philosophical assertions, because I like Dune a lot, but he's so down on the idea of heroes that I find it almost hard to deal with sometimes.
Well,
Um,
you mentioned Dune, so can we segue into what's coming with
oh
the
yeah,
with the with the with the new Dune?
with the
I
movie.
mean, yeah. Do you think there's going to be a fundamental alteration, or is it going to stay true to Herbert's
I
original vision with that?
it looks like it's staying pretty true to the vision, and I think Denis Villeneuve is probably the best director we have working right now. Maybe him or Nolan. It's very close.
Mm.
I'm a big film guy too. But I'm a little concerned, because I watched all 20 minutes that Stephen Colbert lead in, and they're talking about how this is a book about how young people need to stand up and take action and change the world, and Dune is the exact opposite of that. Paul is a young person who changes the world with his superhuman abilities, but he causes 60 billion people to die, and I'm a little concerned it that if it's what the actors say it is, right, and it usually isn't, because actors are not experts in anything but acting. Then I think we're going to see something a little bit more in the David Lynch vein, philosophically, where Paul actually was this great hero in the David Lynch version. Which I do like. I like heroes. I like Luke Skywalker. Paul was never meant to be a Luke Skywalker. It wasn't John Carter, right? He was this sort of anti-hero, and so I worry about the film not living up to that. But visually, it looks awesome, and I'm pretty excited about it.
I was pretty stoked. I never, and admittedly, I never saw Lynch's version of the film. So for me coming in, it's like, oh, I have what I believe to be an idea, and I'll suspend belief, for at least the moments of that. It's interesting. You kind of have alluded to it, but social commentary, right? A lot through the arts and a lot through the mediums that we use, right? You're able to offer perspective on things in a different kind of framing that most people would be used to, right? So your use of older civilizations and sets of government, like so the Roman and Byzantine kind of governments, you're kind of juxtaposing that against what we exist in here and now, right? I have to immerse myself in your story to believe it to be true within that bubble,
right? Yeah, true.
relatively speaking, right? But kind of along that, we do draw from these fiction and nonfiction sources in order to inform our current reality. So what do you see kind of any intersectional, I keep on bringing that word up, I really got to stop using it, but do you see any kind of intersection as you write between the current contemporary events of this world, let's coronavirus, you name it, and your world building and your governance building and your character development and stuff?
I try really hard not to decline on current events like in a recognizable, like, oh, this is a momentary, like, pressing issue kind of way, because I think if you do that, then you damage the shelf life of the product that you've made, right? The art that you've made. I think that great art speaks to more eternal problems, right? Just about human suffering and the relationships of people to, governmental systems. I don't want to use, the sort of Howard Zinn, structure of power kind of thing. I don't like Zinn. But you do still have to find a way to relate individuals to communities. Aha. You
Nice.
know,
I did not pay him for that, folks. Did not.
but you do have to. Those things don't change really, right? You know, there are still people, right? And we can talk about heroes too, right? And the influence that individual people have, because a lot of modern historians like to say that there are no great men, great women. Like, history revolves around these blind processes of market forces and natural pressures. Those things certainly exist, but you can't look at the biography of someone like Alexander the Great, right, and say that, oh, he didn't do anything himself, right? Like, it's just not true, right? The world is fundamentally altered, including those blind processes, markets and religious cultures and all these things, by the influence of individual actors. And one of the things that's so appealing about monarchies and empires in fiction is that you do have a very small, concentrated cast of characters that are running all these things. If you read a history of the Punic Wars, right, now the great characters that you've gotten that are mostly, the military generals, Scipio Africanus, Hannibal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you try to read it really closely, the consuls have to get recalled every single year, and they might not get reelected. So you've got this weird shifting cast of Reguluses and Marcuses and Caiuses and Luciuses, and you can't keep track of that. But when you get to the empire, the reason that the Roman Empire, I think, sort of hangs in our head historically, more than the Republican period that predates it, small r Republican, is because the cast is so much more static. You've got Augustus reigning for 40 years, 39 years, I think. And you've got these other emperors that loom so large, even if they're only around for, barely 4 years, like Caligula, right? Or less time if you're, Otho or Galba or one of those guys, just gone. But you've got these huge, larger than life figures, and that allows you to relate individual to community, but at the other side, right? You've got these people who are running the whole show, and you can focus on. That's why we like Game of Thrones, right? It's this huge, kingdom with probably hundreds of thousands of people in Westeros, maybe millions, that's run by a few dozen, right? And so those lives are really dynamic and interesting. Now, they might be sitting in council meetings, and how George Martin makes council meetings that interesting is kind of a credit to his craft, I think. But
he certainly has a long enough time to get there.
Well, yeah, he does.
Not
You
for
know
nothing.
it.
I'm still waiting,
Yeah, well,
George.
we all are. I do not envy his position.
Yeah.
No, but it would be nice not to have to work 20 hours a day to get these things turned out in a year. I got to tell you.
It's,
Between that and the regular job that I still have.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so you get this interesting sort of relationship between individual, right, and the sort of systems in the middle, and then the people that compose those systems at the bottom, right. And I think that's what's so interesting about these sort of older styles of governance.
No, I really appreciate the context. I mean, it's certainly, I am not a student of history. I have my there's that intersection word that keeps coming to mind. I have my moments where I step into it. My classic training would be in church history. I spent some time in a seminary. Graduated from a seminary, which is a weird kind of a collision into what I do now. But so church
Oh,
history was kind
cool.
of
Yeah.
distilled in there. So Desert Fathers, some of the aesthetics from back in the time. I've raged ad nauseum, I think, to a couple of my coworkers about how Constantine really ruined the establishment of religion. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. And just really, what he did, it was more damaging to the ethos of, or the basis of Christianity or real organized religion, in the Western world than anything else. But
I'd be interested to hear some of that sometime because I'm not sure I agree as yet.
oh, that's good. That's
But
well, we can set this up. We can have drunk church history if you want to,
that
or
would be really
something.
cool.
I would love that. All right, mental note. We're gonna write that one down. We'll get there. And I got a wonderful Muslim brother of mine who I'd love to have on as well. His viewpoints on this stuff is incredible. Um, so all that to be said, look. So I tap dance around some of these things, and I go into it, and it provides a lot of context to some of the stuff that we see in the world today. Some of the cultural aspects of stuff. So I appreciate your background on there. You touched on heroes and anti-heroes, and I
Yeah.
think this is always and this is my very instantaneously formed opinion. One of the things I appreciate about Japanese cinema, for example, is that kind of, or Chinese cinema even, is really that guttingness that you feel at the end of one of their films, where there's no clear victor. Somebody dies. The person that you were rooting for ends up dying anyway, and it leaves you with this emptiness. And maybe they weren't morally solid. There's this kind of element of duplicity that they have, or it just leaves you on that edge. You feel unsatisfied, but it's conclusive. Like, this
Yeah.
is not going to happen again. Or like you mentioned, part of the Star Wars. Well, what are 9 movies called now? Just
No.
train wreck.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Train wreck will do.
train wreck
Um,
will do. So, talk to me a little bit about hero versus anti-hero. Why write one over the other, or why build one up, or can you have both kind of coexist together?
I don't really know, right? I tend to write. I've got a setting, right, and then I put characters in that setting, and then they have to do something. And as far as the theming goes, I like to think I'm running this as an experiment, right? Because Hadrian tells us on page 1, right? I like to say he's Anakin Skywalker. If Anakin becoming Darth Vader is his only and best option,
Mm.
right? Um, he is a nobleman. He runs away from home, and he gets stuck in the middle of this war between the Sullan Empire and these aliens called the Cielsen. The Cielsen are these migratory humanoids. They live in these sort of nomadic starship clusters that fly around, and they'll fall on the planet. They are carnivorous, so when they run out of one another to eat, um, they will go and sack a planet. And there's some Roman history there with I'm not that the Huns are cannibals, right? They weren't, but in terms of their relationship they had to Roman cities, right? These salesmen will raid a planet for livestock, basically, and then they'll run out again and again. So Hadrian's fighting these guys, and he tells us on page 1 that he ended that war, and that he did that by wiping out the Cielsen. Which is very tricky to do when they're that nomadic and migratory, I tell you what. So figuring that one out has been a trick. And I did some damage to myself by nailing that proposition to the table on page 1. And so it's been part of the trouble with outlining these, because I'm a huge outliner. I think the outline for book 4 is like 30,000 words, so like half of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Because
Wow.
Harry Potter is standard units of measure, right? I is trying to untangle this mess, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if when the chips are down, we're going to have a Greek tragedy, right? Where we've had the turn and then we've got some catharsis, or if we've got the Japanese one where instead of a turn, they talk about a break in their dramatic structure, and everything after that looks, it's not the same story anymore. Folks who've read Berserk, you'll know where the break is in that one. Um, it's very obvious. And you see this in a lot of Japanese storytelling. There's like a pivotal moment where like even the genre changes and these characters are thrust into a completely different world. Um, like you're talking about. And I don't know if at the end of the Sun Eater we're going to have a Greek tragedy or a Japanese tragedy, or if we're going to have a hero's narrative. I don't know if Hadrian's actions are going to feel justified to the audience. And I don't want to know because
Mhm.
I don't want to write an essay. Um, I think that one of the virtues of drama, right? We say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but stories are worth more than the words that are on the page because people come away with so many different interpretations. And now some of those interpretations are stupid, and some of those interpretations do not deserve being dignified in academic journals, um, even though they are. But they are still informative in a certain way, right? I think that if an author has a plan and everyone who reads his book comes away with something other than his intention, then the book failed.
Mhm.
He wasn't persuasive. I think, on the other hand, I think the safe way out of this, right, so that I don't have a dramatic failure in the way that T.S. Eliot meant a dramatic failure, is to not have a plan, except in terms of plot and character. And I want to see what everyone's takeaway at the end of this is going to be, because I hope that what I'm doing is rebuilding a hero, right? Because what Frank Herbert did with Paul Atreides, right, is he looked at heroes like John Carter, because Paul and John Carter are actually very similar,
Mhm.
even though they're completely different stories. They're both outsiders who come to this strange other world and who have these strange abilities in no small part because of their outsideness, right? And they end up becoming kings and ruling these strange, other people, right? Paul can see the future. John Carter can jump really high and punch things. He's basically Superman. Um, but in John Carter, we don't have Burroughs is never critical of Carter's heroic nature or his kingship, right? Herbert is nothing but after book one, right? He plays this trick on you where the only like real hints in the first Dune book that Paul is kind of the bad guy are the epigraphs that start these chapters, where Princess Irulan is telling us, "Oh, this is actually like this, huge conqueror who committed all of these, you know, what we would call atrocities trying to build his empire." We're never shown that really, because he skips Paul's wars of conquest and goes right to the end of his rule in book two. And people reading that are like, well, what the hell? I liked him, right? Like everything we've seen Paul do is justified. He gets revenge on the Harkonnens, right, for killing his family, gets revenge on the Emperor for his complicity in that, right? And he tries to build a new world, and he lifts up all the people that he brought with him who helped him in the process. Now that lifting the Fremen up to galactic prominence ends up destroying their culture, right? It destroys the environment of their homeworld, but the environment of their homeworld is a terrible desert, and he destroys their environment by making it a garden. And so it's not obvious that Paul's destruction to the reader, right, based on what we've got on screen, is destructive. But Herbert keeps asserting that it is, and as the series goes on, it becomes a little bit more clear that the point that he's making. But I don't like, even though I hear his criticism that heroes are dangerous, right? I think that we still need to believe in them. And so what I wanted to do with Hadrian is give us a hero who does dangerous and destructive things, and commits unspeakable things, but maybe is still necessary. And so my question with the whole series is he going to be a hero at the end, or will he be an anti-hero or a villain even
Yeah.
outright? And I don't really know. I'm trying to build a case for that. And I'm hoping, I think the most interesting thing would be we get to the end and people don't have a consensus,
Yeah.
because then they have something to talk about, which means I have a community. Um,
You do, yeah, yeah, you
um,
do already.
oh,
I kind of
yeah.
watch those things go, man. It's been incredible to watch. So you're
Well,
almost
thanks.
setting up a Machiavellian kind of proposition here. Like, the person, Hadrian is espousing a kind of an ends justifying the means. I mean that, if I
Yeah.
may, in Demon in White, it is espoused rather large. the ends do have to justify the means, because there is no way to get around certain impediments. And I'm not going to say any spoilers for people who
Sure.
haven't read it. You are trying to get to this natural end. You are having to achieve this goal of saving a planet, right?
Yeah.
And in some of your words, you're going to end up having to save a people by destroying things that are sacred to them, or something that they've come to depend on, right? So
Yeah.
I like the Machiavellian kind of justification, juxtaposition in there, because it's almost absent of a certain type of morality, and it's asking us to
To
assume a
to
level
bring
of,
yours in. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's fascinating to me. I think that's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to it. It's like, huh, I like the way that this is set up, because you're right. I don't know at this point if I like the guy or if I want to hate him,
Yeah,
for
and
what he's
I
done.
want you to decide that, right? Because while the characters definitely have their own positions, I hope that in the characters that I've represented a whole bunch of different ones. Um, and that way, I hope that people, because I want as many readers as possible, right?
Sure.
Any author who is trying to have a career wants as many readers as possible, right? Um, and I don't want to turn readers away who have radically different worldviews than I do. I want them to enjoy the story. So I hope that I'm giving people, I hope I'm giving everyone a voice in the narrative, even though it's all Hadrian's narrative. And Hadrian's so self-critical and so introspective too, that he kind of absents himself in a lot of ways. Even when he gives you these, his thoughts on issues, he's still trying to give the people who are important to him, people he doesn't agree with, but who matter to him personally, because he is pretty fiercely loyal to his people, even when he does not like a lot about
Yeah,
them.
yeah, that's for
And
sure.
and I totally get that, because I have, because you get these childhood friends, right, who become very different as you grow up, but they're still your friend, right? And we all have that friend, right? We're like, well, Steve's kind of a dick, but he's our dick,
Yep.
and so Hadrian has that sort of relationship with a lot of these characters, and so some of those break down, and I mean that's life, right?
Yeah.
But I want my characters to sort of go at each other, right, ideologically, and I don't want to preach to the readers, because they know who they are, and most people are not really persuaded by arguments. I think people are persuaded by events, um, and if something changes dramatically in their life, they might, change. If they're, say, like robbed at gunpoint, they may then go and start taking self-defense classes. They might buy a gun themselves, right?
Sure.
And they might have been against those things beforehand, right? Or vice versa, right? They could have the opposite reaction. But I don't think that debate is actually, I don't know how persuasive it really is, especially these days. But I think that events can be, and I think that maybe fake events can be too. And I hope that this is, uh, a mirror, narratively speaking, that people can find some of themselves in,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, and even new readings of the book, right? As you come back to it, I said it. I read through all three that have been released so far. Anxiously waiting book 4. Get on that while you're at it.
It's half done. It's half done.
Well, hey,
No,
kudos to you for getting that out. I mean, writing
I
process is.
tell you what, it's actually behind. I've had to. I wanted to be about done by now. So it's not where I wanted it. When book 1 came out, book 2 was done, and I've been sliding back with each one a little bit. And so I'm maybe by the end of the series there might be a couple months delay. But
It's life. It's we this year has been topsy turvy for a lot of people, and not the least of which is shifting from a work-life balance to a life balance. It's kind of all inclusive of everything. It's
well said. Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I've worked from home for a decade, and even as I've come through this year, I've kind of realized, hey, wait a second, this is still not the same. It
Yeah.
still feels different.
I thought
Weird.
that being locked at home, because I've been able to go back to the office now for a couple months. I live down in North Carolina, and it's not that bad down here. We have to wear masks, of course,
Yep, yep.
but if you go to the office, fine. There are only like 4 of us in there, and it's a few thousand square feet, so whatever. But before that, I thought, hey, I'm going to get a lot of writing done because I'll be at home and that'll be nice. I won't have to commute or anything, and no, did not happen. But it's still, it's still moving on. I don't know how some writers uh, can go a long time without turning something out. Because if you write 1,000 words a day, you know, you get a 100,000 word novel in a year, you know, in a third of a year. It's a mystery to me.
I'm looking at having to write an 85,000 plus word thesis, you know, for my doctorate, and I sit there and I go, oh God.
Well, that stuff's different, right? That's,
It
you know,
is.
it's denser. I don't have citations. In fact, citations are discouraged.
For sure.
I deliberately will ruin quotes if I think it'll be convenient. There's a couple, I can't remember an example right now, but there are a couple ancient Roman quotes that have been badly spoonerized after
Nice.
20,000 years.
Sure.
And a couple of readers like, hey, that's not right. And I'm like, good, you noticed.
Yeah.
It
No
was
such luck on my side. I was just kind of like, oh, this is great. I just assumed the world's being presented to me in the way that I should understand it to be. Yeah, no, the density thing, you know, I was laughing as I was talking to somebody about doing this podcast today. I'm like, I'm going to really ask the question, you know, the difference between writing, a novel and the academic side. And you kind of espoused it. It's not that one is vastly more important than the other. It's just the density. You know, like, yeah, not having to cite stuff, by the way. I mean, I have Mendeley on my desktop, which everything is tossed in there. Hey, this is a great link. Toss it in there, you know, cite it, you know, make sure it's done in the appropriate format. And you sit there banging your head against the wall at some point going, well, can I use just those 4 words? Does that 4 word get the meaning that I want to? And can I cite it? And by the way, that adds, adds another citation in the back in the bibliography for my thing, you know, like it works out. But
yeah, I never could stand that sort of thing. By last semester in college, I had one of those professors who would like pre-grade your essays, right? Be like, well, we want to like sit down in the office and like go over it because, you know, whatever, and we'll tell you what you're gonna get, right, and how you can improve it, which I think is silly. I should never do that.
yeah.
Because she told me this is a 90 because you didn't cite anything, and if you want 100, you got to go and put back, go put in some citation. Like, but it's a 90.
Yeah.
Keyword
and
there. I'm
passing.
out of here. I'm out of here in 2 weeks. So yeah,
You're
no, I'm
phone
not.
it in at that point.
Yeah, big time. I had Empire to revise. I had bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So because I just sold it. I just gotten an agent the month before I graduated.
Oh, nice.
I sold it the month after. So I got really, really lucky. It's usually not that smooth.
No, it's incredible what you've done, and I know we're up against time here. So
listen, okay.
But, I really appreciate you coming on today. This is like I've been telling everybody, you know, this random guy that approaches you on the internet is asking you for things. You know, sometimes it's good stuff. So like it's
no, man, no. At this point, you know, Zoom meetings are handshakes. I think the world is very different about this now.
Exactly. Well, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the insights. We definitely would love to do. I'll call it drunk church history because that always, it's controversial enough. Wait, drunk and church in the same sense? Yeah, man, it happens.
Well, I'm Catholic, so you know.
I'm Protestant, so I mean, right there, we got a lot to talk about.
That explains the Constantine thing. I gotcha. All right.
Well, we can talk about the Great Schism. We can talk about the 95 Theses, the development of the Lutheran Church over and above the, all that kind of fun stuff. So,
another time. That'll be fun.
It would be fun. I like this. All right. I'll plot it in. We'll figure out how to do that. But appreciate your time today. I encourage everybody to go out and read the Sun Eater series. Not the trilogy, but the series. And book 4 is coming at some point in 2021, which is great. I will anxiously await it. But where can they go? Where's the best place for them to go and buy your books?
Well, they're available pretty much, you know, anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Works, Barnes & Noble. But if you want to get them signed, you can check out quailridgebooks.com, my local bookstore here in Raleigh. And I can go hop across town and sign those for you.
That's awesome.
You might have to wait a day or two for me to get across town, but if you don't mind, I can go get those signed for you. And you can support a local business, which is always a good thing. So.
Absolutely. So go and get the trilogy. Go get it. See, I just did it. I just did it. Go damn it. Go and get the series. Support your local bookstore wherever possible, for sure. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your insights. We will do drunk church history at some point, I promise.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Have a great conversation around that, and we'll take it from there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks,
especially
man.
for your patience with Zoom crashes.
You know, it happens. I've hosted like a dozen of these things for the publisher I work for, so you know, nothing. It was great. Let's do that church thing sometime.
All right, sounds good, man. Thank you.
Thank you.